have as different entities in this application, and how do I actually store this data or create my tables in my data, and then how do I actually make the transactions work with this particular data that I have underneath, Now the most important requirements in this particular case is to actually see that underneath I have actually created a database system. In this particular case I am using a MySQL relational database system, which actually allows me to actually create tables and store the database in the underneath a server for me. Now what are the different ways actually I can now put my data into this system. For example, here is the key database system that I am using for actually creating this rate contract system, that is called rate contract RC underscore April underscore 606, and this has actually got all these tables. As you can see, I have actually got several tables underneath which are all storing the information for me. For example, one can see that there is an approved quotations for add-on systems, this is one table. Then I have the approved quotation for computers, that is another table, and approved quotations for notebooks and approved quotation for printers. Now we can see these are all the tables, in some sense they form the schema of the database, and this is very critical in database design, which you are going to study as part of your course here. How do I design my database system? The starting point for design of the database systems is actually understanding the different entities that are there in your domain. For example, in this particular case there are vendors, there are users, there are people who select based on the what the vendors have quoted. So you have actually got different entities, and they have some relationship with each other. For example, vendors quote into your data, and then there are people who actually pick information from this and choose. So actually you have to understand what are the key entities in your domain, and how exactly each entity in terms of what attributes these entities have. For example, one of the things that you can see here, which is one of the tables, for example here shown here is the quotations for computers, which is something that I have used here. This is one of the tables. Now this table has different fields, these are in entities. For example, if you see quotation computers as some kind of a table which comes from my entity, okay, which we will see in a minute what is the relationship and how do I actually break an entity into a table. Now in this particular case you can see serial number, chipset, vendor name, these are all the attributes or the fields that I have for this particular table. If you take for example vendor name, and they are all registered with IIT Madras, then vendors will have a username and a password, and then their address. These are all the attributes that a vendor entity will have, and when actually I have this vendor as an entity, one way I could possibly create this information into my database is by actually converting this entity into a table. For example, in this particular case, as you can see, a simple thing like users, for example, has the users of the system, and they have the information on company, username, and password being available in this particular table. So if you see user as an entity, these are the fields that will be available as part of that entity. So one easy thing when you are designing your database system is to actually convert the entities into tables, relational tables, and store this information. Now there are a lot of issues, and in terms of converting an entity into a table, because If this information is duplicated, for example, this company name and ID is duplicated in other places, for example, it is available at other places, the company name is available in other tables, then what happens is this duplication of data will create problems when you actually, a company says that now it has changed its name, then you have to go and then start changing this name at multiple locations. So, one of the key things that we understand when we are designing databases is that one fact at one location. So, you do not want to store the same piece of fact at multiple locations, because it causes a lot of problems for you. So, database design concepts will explain how exactly this process of design could be done and how one can come up, given an entity relationship diagram, how you can come up with tables like this. For example, the database design in this particular case has all these 23 tables, and this is the essential part when I design my system, and this is the key of the whole concept. And how do I actually arrive at these 23 tables, and each table, for example, has its own for example, in the case of quotations, you can see this is the schema that I have. You can see the table here as serial number, chipset, vendor name, unit price, bulk 2 price. For example, if they are quoting for more than some number of systems, whether there is a discount additionally, with monitor, without monitor, all this stuff, and then whether the monitor is what kind of monitor brand that they are supplying with me, and what are the comments, for example, whether he wants VAT to be added or it is included, and all this. So, this is what we understand as the database design. Now, the schemas also change. For example, tomorrow I do not want this bulk 2 price to be quoted, because it is no longer my requirement, then I will drop this particular field from my quotation for computers, which means that I no longer need this particular field to be available. This is what we understand as schema change in my system, in my database. And often these schemas change, because as the systems evolve, business processes evolve and systems evolve, schema changes are natural. And your system should be able to cope up with this schema changes. That is other important issue when we actually deal with databases, right. Now, in this particular case, we will go and then see the quotations for computers and see what we had done earlier in terms of these quotations, whether that is available in this particular case. As you can see here, I am using the PHP admin and directly getting into the database. For example, in this particular case, I can go and then browse, for example, the values of the database. Now, you can see that these are the values that are available for this particular field. So, I can also probably browse the entire database. So, you can see that this information that is available in this particular table can be you can use the browse and you can see what is the information available. For example, quotations for computers, you can see now here you have Dave Systems, which quoted Intel G33 chipset for this unit price. This is the bulk price. They did not quote bulk 2 price, then it is a category is it is a local vendor, and then the monitor is ViewSonic, and then some comments for people to look at for both ViewSonic or Acer TFT monitors. You probably would like to supply both of them. So, you can see this this is what we have as the information right now. One can even see how this data gets changed when something got updated. For example, you can go to the as we saw earlier, you can go to the computer system, and once you have quoted for that, you probably can see based on here what I had given earlier as a guest has come up now here. You can see that I have inserted earlier in the as a guest and quoted 25,000 and 18,000 as the unit price, and without monitor I have quoted 18,000. So, that information is reflected here as you can see here, and the default sample has been picked up, and I said VAT is extra, and that is also available for me here. Now, as far as the workflow is concerned, I can use these this information whatever people have quoted, and pick the whatever quotations that I want, put them into the approved quotations, for example, for computers. This will basically reflect the approved quotations for the computers. Now, you can see all the approved data is available in this particular case, and then this is the approved